War has always been shaped by technology, but some inventions didn't just change battles, they changed history itself. From the earliest weapons of stone and bronze to the precision-guided systems of the modern age, warfare has never stood still. Each era introduced new tools, faster, deadlier, more efficient, that reshaped not only how wars were fought, but who could win them. The invention of gunpowder shattered the dominance of medieval fortresses. Industrialization brought machine guns, railways, and mass production, turning conflicts into wars of scale and endurance. In the 20th century, tanks, aircraft, and nuclear weapons redefined entire battlefields in a matter of years. And today, the transformation continues. Drones, artificial intelligence, and cyber warfare are no longer future concepts, they are active forces reshaping strategy in real time, allowing wars to be fought across distances once thought impossible. But the pattern remains consistent. Technology doesn't just improve warfare, it changes its nature. It determines how battles are fought, where they are fought, and often, who survives them. And the implication is clear. Every major leap in military innovation has done more than win wars, it has redrawn borders, collapsed empires, and reshaped the course of human history. Because in war, the side that adapts fastest doesn't just gain an advantage. It changes the future. A wall of shields that moved as one. On the battlefields of ancient Greece, victory did not depend on individual heroics, it depended on unity. Armies advanced not as scattered fighters, but as a single, coordinated force, the Phalanx. In this formation, heavily armed infantry, known as hoplites, stood shoulder to shoulder in tightly packed ranks. Each soldier carried a large round shield on his left arm, deliberately positioned to overlap with the shield of the man beside him. The result was a continuous defensive barrier, a living wall of bronze that protected the entire line, not just the individual. But defense was only half of it. From behind that shield wall, rows of long spears projected forward in unison. The first ranks thrust outward, while those behind added depth and pressure, creating a bristling front that was nearly impossible to penetrate head-on. What made the Phalanx truly formidable was not just its structure, but its discipline. Soldiers advanced in synchronized steps, maintaining formation under pressure. If the line held, it functioned as a single, unstoppable unit. If it broke, the entire system collapsed. And the implication is powerful. The Phalanx transformed warfare from individual combat into collective strategy, where survival depended on cohesion, trust, and precision. It turned an army into a single moving structure. Because in this formation, one soldier was not the weapon. The formation was Rome's battlefield engineering. On the battlefields of the ancient world, the Roman army didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with structure. One of their most striking innovations was the Testudo, or tortoise, formation, where soldiers transformed themselves into a moving fortress. At the command, legionaries compressed into a tight block, interlocking their large rectangular shields to form a continuous shell. The front ranks held shields outward to create a solid wall, while those behind raised theirs overhead, locking edges together to form a protective roof. From above, it looked like a single armored surface, with no visible gaps. This formation was not symbolic, it was functional. Under constant volleys of arrows, javelins, and stones, the Testudo allowed Roman troops to advance steadily toward fortified positions. Missiles that would normally devastate an exposed force instead struck the shield shell and deflected harmlessly away. But the strength of the Testudo came at a cost. Movement slowed dramatically. Visibility was limited. Soldiers inside the formation could not fight effectively in close combat, making it a temporary protection rather than a permanent battle stance. It was most effective during sieges, when crossing open ground under fire mattered more than speed or flexibility. And the implication reveals Rome's true advantage. The Testudo was not just a formation, it was a demonstration of discipline, coordination, and engineering applied to human movement. It turned individual soldiers into a unified structure capable of resisting overwhelming force. Because in Rome's army, protection was not carried. It was built, by the formation itself. The weapon that broke empires. Across the vast Eurasian steppe, a single invention transformed warfare into something faster, deadlier, and almost impossible to counter: the composite bow. Crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, this weapon stored far more energy than a simple wooden bow, allowing it to deliver powerful shots from a much smaller frame. That compact design made it perfect for mounted warriors, who could draw, aim, and fire at full speed from horseback without losing control. But power alone wasn't its greatest advantage. Steppe nomads, Scythians, Huns, Mongols, combined the composite bow with unmatched mobility. Riding at speed, they could strike from a distance, retreat before retaliation, and even fire backwards while fleeing, a tactic known as the Parthian shot. The result was a new kind of warfare. Armies no longer needed to stand and fight in rigid formations. They could move like fluid forces, appearing suddenly, raining arrows from afar, and disappearing before the enemy could respond. This combination of range, speed, and adaptability allowed relatively small nomadic forces to defeat and dominate much larger, more heavily armored armies. And the implication is undeniable. The composite bow didn't just improve ranged combat, it redefined it. It turned mobility into the ultimate weapon, allowing entire civilizations to rise on horseback and challenge the most powerful empires of their time. Because on the steppe, the battlefield didn't belong to the strongest army. It belonged to the fastest one. Sieges decided by machines. In the ancient world, battles were not only won by armies, but by engineering. One of the most precise instruments of siege warfare was the ballista, a weapon designed not for chaos, but for controlled destruction. Often described as a giant crossbow, the ballista used torsion power stored in tightly twisted cords to launch heavy bolts or stone projectiles with remarkable force and accuracy. Unlike earlier siege engines that relied on arc-like trajectories, the ballista fired in a more direct, linear path, allowing it to strike specific targets with precision across long distances. Mounted on frames or platforms, and sometimes even integrated into mobile Roman military units, it could be adjusted for range and direction, making it a flexible tool in both siege and battlefield conditions. But its real significance was not just its power. It was control. Because in an era where most weapons relied on mass and momentum, the ballista introduced something different: targeted engineering applied to warfare. It allowed commanders to strike walls, formations, or key positions with calculated precision rather than brute force alone. And the implication is clear. The ballista didn't just change how sieges were fought. It changed the idea that war had to be unpredictable. Knights feared this simple weapon. On the battlefields of medieval Europe, heavily armored knights were meant to be nearly unstoppable, protected by layers of steel, trained for close combat, and built to dominate the field. But one weapon began to challenge that dominance from a distance: the longbow. Standing over 6 feet tall and requiring years of training to master, the longbow could deliver arrows with remarkable force and speed. In the hands of skilled archers, volleys could reach distances of over 200 meters, striking enemy formations before they could even engage. But its true power was not just range, it was volume and precision. At battles like Agincourt, 1415, English longbowmen fired thousands of arrows in coordinated waves, creating what contemporaries described as a hail of projectiles. These arrows didn't always pierce the strongest plate armor, but they didn't need to. They struck weaker points, joints, visors, limbs, and devastated less armored troops and horses, breaking formations and slowing advances. As armored knights struggled through mud and chaos under constant fire, their advantage collapsed. Exhausted, disorganized, and exposed, they became vulnerable in close combat, turning what should have been a decisive charge into a catastrophic defeat. And the implication is clear. The longbow didn't just challenge the knight, it changed the battlefield itself. It proved that discipline, positioning, and ranged power could overcome even the most elite heavy forces. Because in that moment, armor was no longer enough. A weapon anyone could use. On the battlefields of the medieval world, most ranged weapons demanded years of training, strength, and precision. But one invention changed that balance: the crossbow. Unlike traditional bows, which required the archer to draw and hold the string manually while aiming, the crossbow used a mechanical system to lock tension in place. The user could load the weapon, hold it ready without strain, and fire with a simple trigger release. This changed everything. Because accuracy no longer depended on physical endurance or perfected technique. A soldier could take time to aim, maintain stability, and deliver a powerful shot with far less training than a skilled archer would require. The result was accessibility. Armies no longer needed generations of trained bowmen. With crossbows, rulers could equip and deploy large numbers of soldiers quickly, militias, mercenaries, and conscripts who could become effective ranged units in a fraction of the time. But the implication goes deeper. The crossbow didn't just change how weapons worked, it changed who could fight. It lowered the barrier to entry for warfare, shifting power away from highly trained elites and toward organized, mass-equipped forces. Because for the first time, skill was no longer the only requirement. The weapon did the work. The first gunpowder revolution. For centuries, siege warfare was a contest of patience and persistence, armies relying on trebuchets, catapults, and brute force to slowly break down walls that were built to last. But in the late Middle Ages, a new force emerged that would change that balance forever: the cannon. Powered by gunpowder, early cannons introduced something entirely different to the battlefield: explosive force concentrated into a single, direct impact. Unlike traditional siege engines that lobbed stones in high arcs, cannons fired projectiles in a straight line, striking the base of walls with repeated, focused blows. At first, these weapons were crude and unreliable. But as designs improved through the 14th and 15th centuries, cannons grew larger, more powerful, and more effective. Massive siege guns, known as bombards, could fire heavy projectiles capable of shattering stone defenses that had once been considered nearly impregnable. The impact was immediate. Fortresses that had dominated warfare for centuries began to fail under sustained artillery fire. High, thin walls, once a symbol of strength, became vulnerabilities, forcing engineers to redesign defenses into lower, thicker structures built to absorb cannon fire. And the implication is undeniable. Cannons didn't just replace siege weapons like the trebuchet, they ended an entire era of warfare. They transformed sieges from slow contests of endurance into battles decided by firepower and engineering. Because with gunpowder, walls no longer protected empires. They marked their limits. Firearms replaced blades. For centuries, battle was decided at close range, steel against steel, where swords, spears, and armor defined the outcome. But with the rise of the musket, warfare began to shift away from individual combat, toward coordinated firepower. The musket was not a perfect weapon. It was slow to reload, limited in accuracy, and unreliable in harsh conditions. But it had one decisive advantage: it could be mass-produced, widely issued, and used effectively by large numbers of soldiers with standardized training. To maximize its impact, armies adapted. Infantry no longer fought in scattered groups or dense melee formations. Instead, they formed into long, thin lines, 2 or 3 ranks deep, designed to unleash synchronized volleys of gunfire. These line infantry formations allowed the greatest number of muskets to fire at once, compensating for individual inaccuracy with sheer volume. Discipline became everything. Soldiers drilled relentlessly to load, aim, and fire in sequence, turning the battlefield into a rhythm of coordinated volleys rather than chaotic clashes. Bayonets fixed to muskets ensured that when lines closed, firearms could still function as melee weapons, replacing traditional pikes and blending ranged and close combat into a single system. And the implication is clear. The musket didn't just replace blades, it replaced the way wars were fought. It shifted power from individual skill to collective discipline, from close combat to controlled firepower. Because from that moment on, victory no longer belonged to the strongest warrior. It belonged to the best drilled line. Fortresses became obsolete. For centuries, castles dominated the landscape of Europe, high walls, towering keeps, and narrow defenses built to withstand siege after siege. But by the late Middle Ages, a new force emerged that these structures were never designed to face: artillery. With the introduction of powerful cannons, the very principles of medieval fortification began to fail. Tall, thin walls, once ideal for repelling ladders and siege towers, proved highly vulnerable to sustained bombardment. Cannon fire could shatter stone defenses that had stood for generations, reducing previously impregnable castles to rubble in a fraction of the time traditional sieges required. The response was not to reinforce the old designs, but to abandon them. Engineers began to rethink fortification from the ground up. Walls were lowered and thickened to absorb impact rather than resist it. Towers were replaced with angled bastions, allowing defenders to fire along the length of their own walls and eliminate blind spots. Entire fortress layouts shifted into geometric, star-shaped designs, known as the tres italienne, built specifically to counter artillery threats. These new structures did more than defend, they adapted. They integrated terrain, artillery platforms, and overlapping fields of fire into a unified system, transforming fortresses from vertical strongholds into low-profile, engineered battle spaces capable of withstanding prolonged bombardment. And the implication is clear. Cannons didn't just break walls. They forced the complete reinvention of defense itself, ending the age of the medieval castle and ushering in a new era where survival depended not on height or strength, but on design. Naval warfare transformed. For centuries, battles at sea were decided at close range, ships grappling, boarding, and firing only when they were almost side by side. But with the rise of cannon-armed warships, the ocean itself became a long-range battlefield. Early naval artillery began appearing on ships in the late medieval period, but it wasn't until gunpowder weapons became powerful and reliable that cannons fully reshaped naval combat. By the early modern era, warships were redesigned specifically to carry rows of guns along their sides, turning vessels into floating artillery platforms. This shift changed everything. Instead of closing distance, fleets began engaging from afar. Ships formed coordinated battle lines so they could unleash full broadside firepower, each vessel firing its cannons in sequence or simultaneously to maximize destructive impact. The sea was no longer a space for boarding and melee, it became an arena of distance, timing, and fire coordination. Naval tactics evolved around positioning, wind control, and maintaining formation, where a single break in the line could decide the outcome of an entire battle. And the implication is clear. Cannons didn't just change ships, they changed the nature of naval war itself. Power shifted from physical closeness to controlled destruction across distance, where battles were decided before ships ever touched. Because from that moment onward, the ocean was no longer a place to meet. It was a place to strike first. The deadliest invention of World War I. In the early years of the 20th century, warfare changed in a way that armies were not fully prepared for. Among the most transformative weapons was the machine gun, capable of unleashing sustained, rapid fire far beyond anything previous infantry weapons could achieve. Some models could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, creating continuous streams of bullets that turned open ground into lethal zones of fire. On the battlefields of World War I, this firepower reshaped everything. Infantry charges that once relied on momentum and formation were cut down long before reaching enemy lines. Machine guns, often positioned in fortified trenches with overlapping fields of fire, could halt entire assaults with devastating efficiency. This changed the structure of war itself. Armies dug deeper, building trench systems to survive in a battlefield where crossing open terrain became almost impossible without massive losses. The result was a static, grinding form of warfare where offense struggled against defensive firepower. And the implication is clear. The machine gun didn't just increase casualties, it reshaped the entire logic of combat. Speed and bravery were no longer enough. Survival depended on cover, coordination, and overwhelming preparation before any movement across the battlefield. Because in World War I, a single weapon could hold back entire armies. A weapon you couldn't see coming. In the trenches of World War I, warfare took a turn that changed the battlefield forever, away from visible firepower, and into something far more invisible, and far more feared, chemical weapons. At first, soldiers thought it was just smoke or weather shifting across no man's land. But it wasn't. It was chlorine gas, rolling in thick clouds, seeping into trenches, and attacking the lungs directly. It caused choking, burning, and suffocation in minutes. Soon after came even more advanced agents like phosgene, which was colorless and far more deadly, and mustard gas, which didn't just attack the lungs, but burned skin, eyes, and contaminated entire battle zones for days. Unlike bullets or shells, there was often no immediate warning. Soldiers could be exposed without realizing it until symptoms appeared hours later. By then, it was often too late. Gas masks became standard equipment, but even they could only reduce, not eliminate, the threat. The battlefield had changed, visibility was no longer protection. And the impact was massive. By the end of the war, chemical weapons had caused over 1 million casualties, leaving a psychological scar on soldiers who feared not just what they could see, but what they couldn't. The implication was clear. For the first time in modern warfare, danger was no longer confined to sight, sound, or distance. Because in World War I, the deadliest weapons didn't announce themselves at all. War beneath the sea. For centuries, naval warfare was fought on the surface, ships seeing each other, trading cannon fire, and engaging in visible combat. But beneath the waves, a new kind of warfare emerged, one defined not by sight, but by silence. The submarine changed everything. Early submarines were limited, but as technology advanced, especially during the World Wars, they evolved into stealth platforms capable of operating unseen for long periods beneath enemy fleets. Armed with torpedoes and guided by sonar, they could strike without warning, targeting both warships and vital supply lines. Unlike surface ships, submarines did not need to win in open confrontation. Their strength was invisibility. By staying submerged, minimizing noise, and exploiting the difficulty of underwater detection, they turned the ocean itself into cover. During World War I and World War II, this shifted naval strategy entirely. Merchant fleets became vulnerable, trade routes had to be protected by convoys, and entire naval doctrines were rewritten around one idea: finding something that didn't want to be found. And the implication is profound. Submarines didn't just add a new weapon to naval warfare, they introduced an unseen battlefield beneath it. A space where power was no longer measured by armor or firepower alone, but by the ability to remain undetected. Because once war went underwater, the ocean stopped being just a battlefield. It became a hiding place. Lightning war tactics. In the early stages of World War II, warfare was redefined by speed, coordination, and overwhelming force, a strategy the world would come to call blitzkrieg, or lightning war. At its core was a new way of thinking about combat. Instead of slow, grinding advances, German forces concentrated armored units, especially tanks, into fast-moving spearheads designed to break through enemy lines in a single, decisive. These tank formations were not isolated units, but part of a coordinated system combining infantry, artillery, and air support working in real time. Tanks led the advance. Their speed and armor allowed them to punch through defensive positions, bypass strongpoints, and rapidly penetrate deep into enemy territory. Once a breach was created, mechanized infantry followed to secure ground, while aircraft disrupted communications and supply lines behind the front. This was not random aggression, it was structured momentum. Everything depended on maintaining pressure and mobility. Radio-equipped tanks allowed commanders to adapt in real time, shifting direction, concentrating force, and exploiting weaknesses faster than traditional armies could respond. The result was devastating in the early war years. Entire defensive systems collapsed under rapid, coordinated armored advances that bypassed resistance instead of grinding through it. And the implication is clear. Tanks were no longer just battlefield support, they became the driving force of modern offensive warfare. Speed replaced endurance. Coordination replaced attrition. Because in Blitzkrieg, war was no longer about holding the line. It was about breaking it before it could form. The sky becomes the battlefield. For most of human history, war was fought on land and sea, confined to visible terrain, where movement and distance defined the fight. But in the 20th century, a new dimension opened above it all. The sky became active territory, and aircraft turned it into a battlefield. At first, airplanes were not designed to destroy, they were designed to see. During World War I, early aircraft were used primarily for reconnaissance, giving armies their first real ability to observe enemy positions beyond the front lines. But that advantage did not last long. As soon as one side could see, the other needed to stop them. Aircraft quickly evolved from unarmed observers into armed fighters equipped with machine guns, leading to the first aerial combats in history. The sky was no longer passive, it was contested, fast, and deadly. Then came the expansion of purpose. Planes were no longer just chasing each other, they were striking the ground below. They strafed troops, bombed supply lines, and disrupted movement behind enemy lines, turning air power into a tool of both observation and destruction. By World War II, this transformation had fully matured. Aircraft evolved into specialized machines, fighters for control of the skies, and bombers for strategic destruction of factories, cities, and infrastructure deep behind the front. Entire wars began to depend on who controlled the air above everything else. And the implication is clear. Once war moved into the sky, no battlefield was truly hidden anymore. Every movement on the ground could be watched, and every position could be reached. Because from that moment on, the battlefield was no longer just below the soldiers. It was above them too. The weapon that changed everything. In the final years of World War II, warfare reached a turning point that would redefine global power forever. Hidden within a single weapon was a level of destructive force the world had never witnessed before, the atomic bomb. Developed through the secret Manhattan Project, the bomb was born from breakthroughs in nuclear fission, where splitting atoms released immense energy. By 1945, that research had become reality. When it was first used in combat, over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the results were immediate and catastrophic. Entire urban centers were destroyed in moments. Tens of thousands died instantly, and many more in the following days and years due to radiation exposure. But the impact was not only physical, it was strategic. The introduction of nuclear weapons ended the traditional idea of total war as it had existed for centuries. No fortress, army, or nation could withstand that level of energy. Entire cities became potential targets, and the scale of destruction shifted from thousands to entire populations. And the implication is irreversible. The atomic bomb didn't just end a war, it reshaped the rules of global conflict. It introduced a new reality where a single weapon could alter the fate of nations in an instant. Because after that moment, war was no longer measured in battles. It was measured in consequences. Precision from miles away. In modern warfare, distance no longer means uncertainty. The introduction of guided missiles transformed the battlefield into something far more controlled, where targets can be struck with calculated accuracy from extreme ranges. Unlike traditional weapons that relied on trajectory and chance, guided missiles use advanced navigation systems, such as GPS, inertial guidance, and laser targeting, to continuously adjust their path in flight. This allows them to correct course mid-air and strike designated targets with far greater precision than earlier unguided munitions. This changed the nature of engagement. Instead of closing in for visual confirmation or prolonged combat, forces could now launch strikes from a distance, often beyond the enemy's immediate awareness or ability to respond. Modern missile systems are designed specifically for standoff attacks, enabling destruction without direct confrontation. And the impact extends beyond accuracy. Precision guidance reduces the need for large-scale bombardments, allowing smaller payloads to achieve strategic effects while limiting exposure of the launching force. Warfare becomes less about overwhelming force at close range, and more about timing, intelligence, and controlled execution. And the implication is clear. The guided missile didn't just increase range or accuracy, it redefined the idea of engagement itself. Battles could now be decided before opponents ever see each other. Because in modern warfare, distance is no longer protection. It is simply another variable to calculate. Invisible to radar. On the modern battlefield, survival is no longer just about armor, speed, or firepower. It is about something far more subtle, not being seen at all. This is the idea behind stealth technology. Aircraft like the F-117, B-2, F-22, and F-35 are not truly invisible, but they are designed to drastically reduce how much radar energy reflects back to enemy sensors. Through angular shaping, internal weapon storage, and radar-absorbing materials, they shrink their radar signature until they appear far smaller and harder to track than they really are. On radar screens, they don't vanish, they fade. A target that once appeared clearly now becomes uncertain, delayed, or even mistaken for background noise. That delay is everything. Because modern air defense doesn't rely on just detection, it relies on reaction. And if detection is slowed, reaction collapses. Stealth aircraft exploit this gap. They enter contested airspace with reduced visibility, strike critical targets, and exit before enemy systems can coordinate a response. Instead of winning through force alone, they win through timing, arriving before the battlefield fully understands they are there. And the implication is profound. Stealth doesn't make war silent or invisible, but it changes who sees first, and who survives that first moment of awareness. Because in modern aerial combat, the side that is seen first is often already at a disadvantage. And the side that is seen last may already be gone. War without soldiers. In modern conflict, the battlefield is no longer defined only by boots on the ground. Increasingly, it is controlled from miles away, by operators who may never enter the war zone at all. This shift is driven by drones, or unmanned aerial vehicles, systems that can be remotely piloted or partially autonomous, designed for surveillance, reconnaissance, and precision strikes. From secure control stations, operators guide these aircraft in real time, watching live feeds, tracking movement, and executing missions with precision while remaining physically removed from danger. Originally developed for observation, drones quickly evolved into multi-role systems. They now monitor vast territories for intelligence, guide targeting for artillery, and in some cases carry out direct strikes with guided weapons. Their advantage is not just technological, it is structural. By removing the pilot from the aircraft, drones reduce risk to personnel while extending reach far beyond traditional limits. Entire operations can be conducted without direct engagement, compressing the distance between decision and action. And the implication is profound. Drones are reshaping the logic of warfare itself, where visibility, distance, and even human presence on the battlefield are no longer required for control. Because in this new era, war is not always fought where soldiers stand. Sometimes, it is fought where they are not. The battlefield goes digital. In modern conflict, war is no longer confined to land, sea, or air. A new domain has emerged, silent, invisible, and constantly active, the digital battlefield. This is the world of cyber warfare. Unlike traditional combat, cyber warfare does not rely on physical force. Instead, it targets the backbone of modern society, infrastructure, communication networks, financial systems, and national security platforms, through digital intrusion and disruption. Power grids can be shut down. Communication lines can be intercepted or disabled. Government databases can be infiltrated. Even transportation and emergency systems can be disrupted, all without a single physical strike. These attacks often use malware, phishing, ransomware, and denial-of-service operations to weaken or destabilize critical systems. But the real danger lies in how quietly it happens. Cyber operations can remain undetected for long periods, allowing attackers to gather intelligence, manipulate data, or prepare disruptions long before the target realizes it has been compromised. And the implication is profound. In this new form of warfare, borders mean less than networks. Power is no longer measured only in armies, but in access, control, and information. Because in the digital age, a nation doesn't always fall through invasion. Sometimes, it falls through its systems. From ancient formations to digital warfare, the evolution of technology has continuously reshaped how conflicts are fought, and how history unfolds. What began with disciplined ranks and simple weapons has transformed into a domain of precision strikes, autonomous systems, and invisible cyber fronts. Each step forward has not just increased power, but redefined the battlefield itself, expanding it from physical terrain to global, interconnected systems. And the pace is accelerating. The next shift may not arrive over centuries, but within years, emerging quietly, tested in real time, and capable of altering the balance of power before the world fully understands it. Because in war, the future doesn't wait. It arrives. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others. Your support helps us continue creating cinematic, documentary-style content that explores the forces shaping our world, past, present, and what comes next.